Welcome to Kuma English Listening Hub. In today's episode, we are delving into a rather unexpected cultural phenomenon: tiny libraries in unlikely places, and how they are quietly changing the way we read, share stories, and think about public space. I am not talking about grand national libraries or university archives. I mean the small, often quirky book exchanges that pop up in old phone boxes, on housing estates, at train stations, in laundrettes, and even beside remote coastal footpaths. They are sometimes called little free libraries, book boxes, book swaps, or in a wonderfully British way, simply that shelf of books at the back. At first glance, they look almost laughably modest. A few battered paperbacks in a repurposed cupboard. Yet, as we will see, these tiny collections reveal surprisingly complex questions about who reading is for, what counts as culture, and how communities reinvent themselves when budgets are tight and attention is constantly pulled online. Let's start on a drizzly afternoon in a small village in the southwest of England. Imagine a red telephone box, the classic British icon, standing slightly askew on the village green. The phone itself has long since gone. The box was nearly removed altogether, but the villagers, not keen on losing a familiar landmark, turned it into something else. Inside, the shelves are crammed with books: detective novels, gardening guides, cookbooks, children's stories with dog-eared corners, an old catalog of British birds, and, inevitably, a copy of Pride and Prejudice. The glass panels are fogged from the damp. There is a faint smell of second-hand paper and wet coats, and a handwritten sign reads, "Take a book, leave a book. No need to ask. Cheers." It is not glamorous. It is certainly not curated by a professional librarian in a cardigan issuing stern shushes. Yet this small, almost ramshackle library has become an everyday ritual for many locals. People wander by on their way to the shop, have a quick nose around, and swap a book or two. Children tug at their parents' sleeves, hoping to find the next installment in a series. Elderly residents, who may be a bit knackered and not all that mobile, appreciate not having to travel to the nearest town to get something new to read. On the face of it, this is just a local curiosity. But if we zoom out, we see that similar little libraries have been sprouting up across the UK and around the world. They appear in bus stations in Manchester, on estates in East London, in the waiting room of a GP surgery in Birmingham, and in the foyer of a theater in Edinburgh. There are even book boxes along long-distance walking routes, where hikers can swap a thriller at a bothy halfway up a mountain, which is about as unlikely a place for a book club as you could imagine. Why has this become a thing now? There are several overlapping reasons, and none of them on its own quite explains the whole story. Firstly, there is the very practical issue of access to books. In many parts of the UK, public libraries have faced budget cuts for years. Some branches have closed, others have reduced their opening hours, and many find themselves relying on volunteers to stay afloat. For people without the spare cash to buy new books regularly, this is not a trivial shift. A free source of stories, information, and frankly, company has quietly shrunk. Into that gap step these micro-libraries. They are undeniably imperfect. The range of books can be wildly uneven. The romance section is often overwhelming, and no one can guarantee that what you want will be there. Yet they do something vital. They keep the idea of freely shared reading alive. Secondly, there is a strong social dimension. In an age when we are told that everything is moving online, these tiny physical exchanges offer a different kind of connection. You never meet the person who left the book before you, but you are in conversation with them nonetheless. When you stumble across margin notes, or a shopping list used as a bookmark, you get a little glimpse of a stranger's life. It is oddly intimate. It is also disarmingly democratic. Unlike the carefully staged lives on social media, the contents of a tiny library are decidedly unfiltered. You are as likely to find a dog-eared, deeply unfashionable thriller as you are a Booker Prize winner. Some people find that chaotic mixture rather annoying. Others find it spot on, a refreshingly honest reflection of what people actually read, not what they think they ought to be seen reading. Thirdly, These little libraries are part of a broader shift in how we think about public space. In many towns and cities, there has been a steady erosion of places where you can simply be without having to buy anything. Pubs have closed, youth clubs have disappeared, and shopping centers have filled any remaining seating with adverts. By contrast, a tiny library takes up almost no space, requires minimal money to maintain, and yet sends a powerful message. This corner belongs to everyone. Anyone can contribute, anyone can benefit. There is no gatekeeper at the door asking if you can afford a coffee. Of course, it is not all roses. Critics point out that tiny libraries can be a bit of a sticking plaster solution. They may offer a charming photo opportunity, the sort of thing that makes for a cute local news story, while masking the more serious issue of properly funded public libraries disappearing. You can see the temptation. It looks like the problem is sorted, when in reality, a box of donated novels cannot replace the professional expertise, digital access, and safe study spaces that full libraries provide. There is also the question of who actually uses these small libraries. In some more affluent areas, you may find they become yet another lifestyle accessory, nestled between the artisan bakery and the yoga studio, a kind of cultural decoration that looks brilliant on Instagram. In other places, though, especially on estates that have seen better days, these book swaps can feel much more rooted in everyday necessity and mutual support. Let's look at a concrete example. In a tower block in East London, a residents group decided they were fed up with the image of their building as a place where nothing good ever happened. They set up a small bookshelf in the lobby. At first, it was pathetic. 3 thrillers, a celebrity cookbook, and a children's picture book with half the pages colored in. But over time, people began to contribute. Someone added exam revision guides. Another left several novels in Polish. A neighbor contributed parenting books and a dictionary. The local primary school sent over a box of worn but still usable children's titles. A retired teacher started leaving short reading recommendations on sticky notes, saying things like, "Page 47 will make you laugh out loud," or "This one is brilliant if you're keen on history." The bookshelf is still just that, a shelf. Yet residents began to chat more in the lobby, swapping tips about which books their children enjoyed or which crime writer was not quite my cup of tea, mate. It did not magically fix complex structural issues, but it did nudge the atmosphere from wary silence to something a bit more human. There is another layer here which we should not underestimate: the environmental angle. In a world drowning in stuff, the constant buying of new books, reading them once, and letting them gather dust is not exactly eco-friendly. Tiny libraries make reuse and sharing feel normal rather than virtuous. You do not need to announce that you are sustainable. You simply put the novel you have finished into the box and take another one home. In some places, this ethos has moved beyond books. People have added seed packets, recipe cards, or even spare jars of homemade jam alongside the paperbacks. It is an informal exchange economy, based less on strict accounting and more on a sense that, one way or another, it will all even out. You may be wondering at this point whether these tiny libraries are a passing fad, destined to disappear once the novelty wears off. The answer, as so often, is, it depends. In communities where the library is treated as a shared responsibility, with a few people quietly ensuring that the shelves do not become a dumping ground for outdated encyclopedias, they often endure. In others, they fall into disrepair. The door breaks, the books go moldy, and eventually someone says, "Fair enough, this clearly is not working," and it is removed. What seems to make the difference is less the physical structure and more the social contract around it. When people genuinely feel a sense of ownership, not in the legal sense, but in the emotional sense, they will go out of their way to keep it going. A teenager who usually would not be caught dead tidying anything might still pop in to straighten the shelves if that little library is where they discovered a novel that really spoke to them. For language learners, by the way, tiny libraries offer their own quiet opportunities. You might stumble across simplified readers, children's stories with accessible vocabulary, or even bilingual editions. It is a very low-pressure way to encounter real-world language, complete with all its quirks, slang, and the odd typo. No one is watching you, no one is testing you, and if the book turns out to be dreadfully boring, you can simply slip it back and try another. There is something deeply human about the act of passing on a book you have loved, knowing that you may never know who reads it next. It is a small act of trust and perhaps even of hope. Hope that the story which moved you might comfort, challenge, or amuse someone else. In Britain, we have a long, occasionally eccentric tradition of such informal cultural institutions. Think of the village notice board outside the post office, plastered with adverts for piano lessons, missing cats, and nearly new prams. Tiny libraries sit squarely in that tradition. They are not neat, not centrally controlled, and not especially efficient, but they are, in their own way, gloriously alive. We should resist the temptation to romanticize them entirely. A few shelves of donated books will not solve educational inequality, social isolation, or the digital divide. They are not a substitute for serious investment in public services. However, they do offer something that is increasingly rare: an everyday, unmonetized gift economy in which culture is not merely consumed but circulated. There is a phrase you often hear in British conversations when a plan is more or less acceptable, if not ideal. That'll do. Tiny libraries are, in one sense, a massive that'll do response to a whole host of larger problems. And yet, for the people who discover a favorite author or a life-changing idea on those cramped shelves, they can feel less like a compromise and more like a minor miracle. If you visit the UK, keep an eye out for them. You might see a painted cabinet screwed to a garden wall, a repurposed bus shelter with a bookshelf in the corner, or even a weatherproof box at the edge of a muddy footpath, stocked by some anonymous book fairy who trudges out with a rucksack of fresh titles every few weeks. Should you come across one, you have a choice. You can treat it as a quaint curiosity, snap a photo, and move on. Or you can step a little closer, have a rummage, and become, in a small but tangible way, part of the story. Before we wrap up, let's briefly reflect on the language we have encountered in this episode. We have explored idiomatic British expressions such as spot on, not my cup of tea, and that'll do, along with colloquial words like knackered, and phrases such as fair enough and cheers. These expressions are very common in everyday British English, especially in informal conversation, and they carry subtle shades of attitude, from mild approval to ironic resignation. We have also seen how more formal academic language can sit alongside these idioms. Words like phenomenon, erosion, gatekeeper, sticking plaster solution, and democratic, all useful if you want to discuss social issues and cultural change in a nuanced way at a high level. As you listen again, you might like to do the following. Note down 3 new expressions that you find particularly British and try to use them in your own sentences. Identify 2 complex sentences and see if you can paraphrase them in simpler language without losing the original meaning. Consider how tone shifts throughout the episode, moving from descriptive storytelling to critical analysis and back again. If you can understand not just the words, but also the tone and the attitude behind them, you are well on your way to operating at a genuinely advanced C2 level of English. Thanks for listening to Kuma English Listening Hub. Next time you see a tiny library in an unlikely place, you may well look at it with slightly different eyes. Until next time, happy listening and happy reading.